The text message pops up on the screen at 10:30 p.m. It isn't explicit. It isn't a confession of love. It's just a meme about a chaotic meeting you both sat through earlier that day. You smile, you type a quick, witty reply, and then, without even thinking about it, you delete the thread. That specific action, that split-second decision to hide a harmless joke, is the moment the affair actually began. But to understand how you went from a loyal partner to keeping secrets in the dark, we have to go back to the very beginning. You've probably used the term work wife or work husband yourself. It seems innocent enough. It's a label for that one colleague who gets you, the person who knows your coffee order, covers for you during lunch, and understands the specific stress of your office politics. You might think this relationship is a safety valve that actually helps your real marriage by venting stress. But psychologists have discovered that this specific dynamic is actually one of the most deceptive, slippery slopes in human behavior. What if I told you that the very things making this person a great coworker are the exact same psychological triggers that prime your brain for infidelity? Today, we are going to dismantle the psychology of the workplace affair. We aren't looking at the moral failings. We are looking at the brain chemistry, the proximity effect, and the emotional gradualism that turns a platonic ally into a romantic threat. You are about to see why the safe work friend is often dangerous precisely because they feel so safe. It begins with a concept psychologists call the mere exposure effect. This is a cognitive bias where people tend to develop a preference for things and people merely because they are familiar with them. Consider the math of your life. You likely spend about 40 to 50 hours a week with your colleagues. If you factor in commuting, sleep, and household chores, you might actually be spending more conscious, high-functioning hours with your work spouse than your real spouse. In the office, you are in the trenches together. You share a unique language of acronyms, deadlines, and shared enemies. This creates a foxhole mentality. When you survive a brutal quarter end or a difficult client presentation together, your brain releases oxytocin, the bonding hormone. You aren't just coworkers, you are survivors of the same battlefield. This shared trauma and triumph creates a bond that your spouse at home simply cannot access. Here is the trap you don't see coming. At home, your interactions with your partner are often logistical. Who is picking up the kids? Did the electric bill get paid? What are we doing for dinner? The conversation is functional, often tired, and laden with the heavy responsibilities of running a life. But at work? At work, you are discussing ideas. You are solving problems. You are presenting the most competent, dressed up, and sharpest version of yourself. Think about it. Your work spouse never sees you in your sweatpants with the flu. They never argue with you about whose turn it is to do the dishes. They only see the professional you, the version of you that is capable, funny, and ambitious. And conversely, you only see their best side. This lack of domestic reality creates an idealized image. You aren't falling for a real person. You are falling for a curated persona that exists in a vacuum, free from the friction of real life. This is where the window and wall theory comes into play, a concept developed by the late psychologist Shirley Glass. In a healthy relationship, there is a window between you and your partner. You are open and transparent. There is a wall between you and the outside world to protect the relationship, But when you start sharing your emotional burdens with a work spouse, you start building a wall between you and your partner and opening a window to the colleague. It feels subtle. You have a fight with your spouse before leaving for work. You arrive at the office angry and hurt. Your work spouse asks, "Is everything okay?" And you sigh. You tell them a little bit about the argument. They validate you. They say, "Wow, I can't believe they said that to you. You don't deserve that." That rush of validation is addictive. Suddenly, the colleague feels like an ally, and your spouse feels like the antagonist. You have just successfully outsourced your emotional intimacy. The work spouse becomes the hero of your story because they require nothing from you but conversation. They don't need you to fix the sink, they just listen. And the brain loves the path of least resistance. We also have to talk about the role of insider information. One of the primary ways humans bond is through shared secrets. In a corporate environment, this starts professionally. You know about the layoffs before they happen. You know who is getting promoted. Sharing this privileged information creates a tight circle of trust. But the brain struggles to differentiate between professional secrets and personal secrets. Once you are accustomed to whispering about the boss, it feels natural to whisper about your personal dreams, your fears, and eventually, your unhappiness at home. This is the crossover point. You are no longer just colleagues. You are conspirators. And there is an inherent thrill in conspiracy. It spikes dopamine. Every time you share a look across the boardroom table that says, "Can you believe this?" you are reinforcing a private intimacy that excludes everyone else, including your partner. But wait, because we haven't even touched on the most dangerous biological trigger yet. It's called misattribution of arousal. This is a psychological phenomenon where the brain mistakes high adrenaline situations for sexual attraction. High-stress jobs are breeding grounds for this. You are working late. The deadline is looming. Your heart is racing. Your blood pressure is up. You are hyper-focused. You are sitting next to your work spouse, tackling this crisis. Your brain feels that physiological arousal, the racing heart, the sweat, the focus, and it looks for a target. It often misinterprets that stress response as passion for the person sitting next to you. You think you have chemistry, but often you just have anxiety and a deadline. And this brings us to the halfway point of our analysis, but don't click away, because the most insidious part is coming up. We are about to look at how micro-cheating rewires your moral compass without you even noticing, leading to a point of no return. So, how do good people who value their marriages end up crossing the line? It happens through the erosion of boundaries, or what psychologists call progressive desensitization. If you met a stranger at a bar and they touched your lower back, you would pull away. It would feel like a violation of your marital vows. But with a work spouse, the physical barriers break down slowly. It starts with a high five, then a pat on the shoulder during a hard day, then sitting a little too close while looking at a computer screen, then a hug after a promotion. Because the relationship is framed as friendship or teamwork, your defense mechanisms are down. You don't view these touches as sexual, so you don't put your guard up. This is where the concept of the ambiguous space becomes lethal. Work trips, happy hours, and late-night projects occur in a gray zone. It's not a date, it's a business dinner. It's not a hotel room rendezvous, it's reviewing the slide deck in the lobby. The context provides plausible deniability. You can tell yourself, and your spouse, that nothing is happening. And, strictly speaking, physically, maybe nothing is. Yet. But the emotional affair is often already in full swing. You start saving your best stories for them. When something funny happens on the weekend, your first instinct isn't to tell your partner, but to make a mental note to tell your work spouse on Monday. You are essentially living your life for an audience of one, and that audience is not the person you married. You might be thinking, I have self-control. I know the difference between a friend and a lover. But the brain is an expert at rationalization. We call this cognitive dissonance. When your actions, getting too close to a coworker, conflict with your beliefs, I am a loyal spouse, your brain becomes uncomfortable. To fix this, you have two choices: stop the behavior or change the narrative. Most people change the narrative. You tell yourself, my spouse is too controlling, or my spouse doesn't understand my career. You start to villainize your partner to justify the closeness with the colleague. You manufacture grievances to make the emotional betrayal feel like a necessary survival tactic. You aren't cheating. You are just finding someone who understands. Let's look deeper at the novelty bias. In a long-term marriage, the mystery is gone. You know how your partner chews, how they sleep, and the same 3 stories they tell at parties. The brain stops releasing dopamine for the familiar. It craves the new. The work spouse is a puzzle you haven't solved yet. They are a mystery. This novelty triggers the same reward centers in the brain that drug addiction does. You get a hit of dopamine when you see their name in your inbox. You feel a rush when you walk into the office and see their car in the lot. This chemical cocktail is incredibly powerful, and it makes your stable, predictable marriage feel boring by comparison. You mistake boring for bad and exciting for love. Now consider the sunk cost fallacy of the marriage versus the potential gain of the affair. When you are deep in the work-spouse dynamic, you begin to engage in fantasy. You imagine a life with this person. But remember, this fantasy is flawed because it is based on a dataset that excludes reality. You imagine a life of endless, stimulating conversation and professional power coupling. You don't imagine the reality of shared bank accounts, sick children, or aging parents. You are comparing your spouse's behind-the-scenes footage with your work spouse's highlight reel. It is an unfair comparison that your partner is destined to lose. There is also a gendered component to this psychology that is worth noting. Studies suggest that men often look for sexual validation in these relationships, while women often seek emotional connection and appreciation. The work-spouse dynamic provides a perfect storm for both. The man feels admired for his competence and power. The woman feels heard and understood. It is a reciprocal feeding of ego that creates a closed loop. As this loop tightens, the secrecy increases. This is the final stage before the physical affair. You start hiding the extent of your communication. You flip your phone face down. You change the contact name. You stop mentioning them at home because you sense your partner's suspicion. Once you start lying about the contact, you have already crossed the Rubicon. The secrecy itself acts as an accelerant. Psychologists call this the Romeo and Juliet effect. The feeling that the relationship is forbidden or under threat actually increases the romantic attraction. By trying to hide it, you are making it more intense. You and your work spouse become us against the world. Then comes the catalyst. Usually it involves alcohol or travel. Alcohol lowers the inhibition of the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain that says, this is a bad idea. You are at a conference. You are both far from home. The real world feels distant. The walls of your marriage feel far away, and the window to your colleague is wide open. The conversation shifts. It moves from work to life to feelings to us. One person crosses the line, a hand on the knee, a confession of attraction. And because you have spent months, maybe years, laying the emotional foundation, the physical jump feels like a small step, not a giant leap. You have already been intimate in every way except physically. The physical act is just the punctuation mark at the end of a sentence you've been writing for a long time. But here is the tragic irony that usually follows. When work spouses turn into real affairs, and eventually real relationships, the success rate is statistically incredibly low. Why? Because once you remove the workplace context, the shared enemy, the forbidden thrill, the professional veneer, you are left with two normal, flawed people. The perfect work spouse turns out to be just as messy, demanding, and human as the partner you left. The fantasy collapses under the weight of reality. You realize that you didn't fall in love with a person. You fell in love with a mirror that reflected a better version of yourself. So, does this mean men and women can never be friends at work? Not necessarily, but it requires a level of vigilance that most people are too lazy to maintain. It requires acknowledging that the work spouse label is not cute. It is a warning sign. It requires keeping the window to your partner open. It means talking about your colleague to your spouse constantly, making them a real person rather than a fantasy figure. It means never sharing something with a colleague that you wouldn't feel comfortable having your partner read. It means understanding that your brain is wired to seek novelty and validation, and that you have to actively fight against that biology to protect your commitment. We like to think we are sophisticated, rational beings who are above these primal urges. We think, I would never do that. But the cemeteries of broken marriages are filled with people who said, we're just friends, right up until the moment they weren't. The psychology is clear. Proximity plus vulnerability plus secrecy equals intimacy. If you feed that equation, the result is almost inevitable. The work-spouse relationship feels safe because it happens in the light of the office, but it is usually the shadow that destroys the home. As we wrap up, I want you to look at your own professional relationships honestly. Are you saving your best energy for the office? Are you complaining about your partner to a colleague who always takes your side? The line isn't usually crossed in a hotel room. It's crossed in the daily micro-betrayals of where you place your emotional investment. Realizing this dynamic is the only way to stop it. It requires recognizing that the spark you feel isn't destiny. It's just dopamine and proximity playing a trick on your mind. I want to leave you with a question that might be uncomfortable to answer. Think about your closest colleague of the gender you are attracted to. If your partner could read every text, hear every lunch conversation, and see every interaction you've had with that person in the last 6 months, would they feel secure or would they feel betrayed? Let me know your honest perspective in the comments below. Do you think the term work spouse is harmless fun? Or is it the first step toward disaster? I'll be reading your responses. Thanks for watching.